La última vez subrayamos los verbos, okay? Los primeros pobladores de América vinieron. They came. Okay? And so we said, why do we choose vinieron y no venían? Porque we're just trying to say they came, just a point in time, just un punto. They came. Okay? Not they would always come, okay? Not they were in the middle of coming when they got attacked by a bear, and not there were people coming and etc., etc., right? So we went through each verb, and so now we're going to look at the endings. We're going to find the endings on certain verbs, okay? So you probably already know this from like Spanish 1 or 2 or 3, that there's like different verb families, right? AR verbs, ER verbs, IR verbs. So AR verbs and ER and IR. So el pretérito, vamos a buscar los verbos en pretérito y poner like cómo terminan los verbos. And so aquí, like este formato es como organizamos nuestros verbos, las conjugaciones. So for example, if there's one person, it's always on the left side, and more than one person is always on the right side. And then if we're just talking about ourselves, first person, yo or nosotros, talking about to another person, second person, you. So I know you all do not use vosotros, right? Nowhere in Latin America do they use vosotros. But remember, this class is to teach you how to learn to communicate in more contexts, right? And so if you talked with a person from Spain, it would be inauthentic for you to start using vosotros. I would never expect for you to actually say vosotros out of your mouth. But a person from Spain is not going to stop using vosotros just because they're talking to you. So you need to be able to understand when they say something. Does that make sense? So, and also we will learn vos. Okay? So there are far more people in the world that use vos than vosotros. But to me, it's really sad that vos is almost never in the textbooks, as if it's like slang or something, but it's not. It's like a legitimate way to say you throughout huge parts of Latin America, all right? Not just Argentina. So we'll learn a little bit about vos. But pretérito, points in time. So let's find our verbs where we had points in time. Vamos a buscar los verbos. Entonces, primero, encontramos vinieron, a point in time, right? So vinieron es un verbo AR, ER, o IR. So if I was just trying to say to come, how would I say? I want to come to the party. Venir, right? Okay, so venir en el pasado, ellos vinieron. Okay, and so termina en ieron. Okay, ustedes vinieron. So let's just test our theory and make sure that works. All right, so we have, for example, well, cruzaron is an AR verb, right? Establecieron. Okay, establecieron. So establecer, not imperfecto. Preterito. Establecer, establecieron, right? Okay. For cruzar, we have cruzaron, because we were saying that they just crossed. We weren't talking about them always crossing. We weren't talking about them being in the middle of crossing when the ocean flooded, and we weren't talking about a scene where there's like people crossing in the background and a whole bunch of other things going on. So they just crossed. For AR verb, AR, what will be the ending? Cruzaron. Aron. We didn't talk about ourselves doing things, but if I said, how would I say, like, I spoke with him? So I say, yo hablé. Okay? So, yo hablé. What if I say, we spoke with him? Nosotros hablamos. How would you say you spoke with him? Hastes. ¿Está bien? Ella dice hablaste. ¿Por qué hablaste y no hablaste? I need to stop and take a little detour here, y'all. Just one little detour, but stay with me, because this is probably one of the most important detours we will take all year. So hablaste, hablastes. Where do reference from? A lot of Mexicans here always adding on that ending with AR verbs. Can anyone explain that to me? Vinistes, corristes, hablastes. So it's not just Mexico, it's like everyone. So here's the thing. I want y'all to imagine you're going to a wedding, okay, and you have a beach wedding, and you have like a formal wedding in like a hall, okay, like super formal wedding. So in a beach wedding, would you dress the same as a formal wedding? There are many, many Spanish teachers, especially like gringos like me, who tell people that their Spanish is wrong. That's wrong. You shouldn't say that. And it's entirely the wrong thing. Like, why would I tell you that like the language you use to communicate with your friends and family every single day successfully express love and emotions and everything else that is wrong? Like, it's clearly not wrong. That's how you talk to the people you love, right? It would be like if you had hip hop artists, right? If you had Future, and Future was, instead of like talking the way that he talks, which is like his trademark, he was like, yes, that is with whom I went yesterday, right? Like, all of his fan base would be like, are you serious? No one talks like that. Like, it would be a disservice, right? But if Future was like, I don't know, giving an address at some presidential function, right, he might choose to use different words. Okay, and so this is the case with things that some people will say is slang. It's really not slang. It's, if it's used by hundreds of thousands or millions of people, it's not slang, it's legitimate language. It's just not always the language you would choose for a professional setting. Does that make sense? So please, if I ever imply that anything that you guys say is like wrong, and you're like, no, my mama says that, my grandma says that, my brother and sister, like, it's not wrong, right? Like, please just stop me in my tracks, okay? But what I try to teach you for is in Spanish, right? You can think of it as a pyramid, and so this pyramid, we love pyramids, right? We're all like pyramids. This pyramid is how much the language has variation. What do I mean by that? So doctors in Spain, doctors in Peru, doctors in Mexico, doctors who speak Spanish in the United States, they are all going to use almost the exact same language to talk about their medical conditions. There's going to be almost no variation because there's like one set of words for those and they all use the same words, right? And so if you're going to communicate in that environment, you have to learn doctor vocabulary, right? And there's just very little variation. So anyone from Spain could understand anyone from Honduras could, okay? Whereas, I don't know if you've ever heard people on TV, like maybe someone from Spain on Netflix, and they're like talking with their friends. You're like, I have no idea what they're saying. Like, they're saying all this thing. Or even like English people, right? They're talking about bloody this and my mates and my, like, and you're like, what? Like, they call it like the hood of their car, their bonnet, and their trunk of their car, their boot and stuff. And you're like, I know these words, but they don't make sense, right? So that's not how we talk. So when you talk about like day-to-day stuff with your friends and family, beach wedding, this is where there's the most variation. This is where people from Dominican Republic talk different than people in Mexico, talk different than people in Spain, and all of that stuff. And so, and for me as a non-native speaker, this is the hardest thing. It's so crazy. I can like totally listen to some podcast or any professional setting. I understand like almost 100% of academic vocabulary. But then sometimes when you guys are like talking to me about my weekend and stuff like that, I'm like, I don't understand what you're saying, right? Because maybe I learned how to say things in Dominican Republic that you guys express in Mexican Spanish, right? And so I want to like impress upon you that because this is my expertise, academic language, this is what I'm going to be teaching you about because I think that this is probably the part that most of y'all don't know, right? Whereas like you guys can teach me like, oh no, we say this in Mexico, we say this with my family, right? And so I just want you guys to be able to communicate like in more professional settings, in your job. Like, why should you take this class, right? So even if, like I was telling one of your classmates before, that like this class will help you no matter what you do in your life. Because real talk, if you get hired at a job and your boss is white or something else, right? And you're like, oh, I'm Latino, I can speak Spanish. They're going to expect that you can read and write in Spanish. It's not fair that they will expect that of you, but there's going to be times where they're like, can you translate that document for me? Can you check this email for me? Can you whatever, right? And so the more you can do about that, like the better, like the more money you're going to make, the more in demand you'll be, right? And so, for example, if you wrote hablastes in the email and they were sending it to like the CEO of some corporation, the CEO would be like you're wearing flip-flops to a fancy wedding. Does that make sense? Right? It's just, he'll know what you're saying, but he'll be like, I don't know. I mean, right? It's like using to when you should use usted. Okay, and so that's the case with hablastes or istes. So dijistes, hablastes. So on your pretest, like I had a question about dijistes, right? And almost 100% of you guys chose dijiste and not dijiste. Okay, and so that was assigned to me like, oh, okay, well, I need to make sure that they know that that there's other, the whole Spanish-speaking world does not accept hablaste or dijiste, hablastes or dijistes, but the whole Spanish-speaking world will accept dijiste and hablaste. Make sense? Okay, so please, I am not suggesting you should ever change the way you speak with your friends or family or loved ones. I'm just trying to kind of broaden your bubble of communication. Does that make sense? All across the world, Spanish speakers make Spanish speaking people feel bad about their Spanish, and I never want to make you feel bad. I only want to empower you. All right, so we had el pretérito, we had haste. So how would you say he spoke? Él habló. Okay, and then we said, I think we already said hablamos, right? Do you guys know how you would say it with vosotros? What is it? Hablastes. So it actually has the N. It's just not hablastes, it's hablastes. So in present tense, it would, hablais is y'all are speaking, but in past tense, hablastes. Ellis, hablastes. Hablastes, okay? And then past tense for they, we already talked about cruzaron, right? They crossed. Cruzaron. All right. But ER and IR verbs, so how would you say I ate? Yo comí. Okay? And so y'all, or you ate. Tu comiste, right? He ate. Él comió, right? And then we ate. Nosotros comimos, right? Okay? And then vosotros comisteis. And y'all ate, or they ate, comieron, right? Comieron. On the other hand, these were all for points in time. I ate, I talked, I went, I whatever, I crossed. So those are all for points in time, preterito. But imperfecto, remember, is either repetition, things in progress, or describing the scene. So what would we say if I used to always play with my friends at my grandma's house? Yo jugaba, right? Because yo jugué is like one time. Yo jugué tres veces. But de niño siempre jugaba con mis amigos, no? So jugaba implies over and over. So see how when we choose jugaba over jugué, it's painting a different picture in our head. Okay? Tú jugabas. Ella or él jugaba. El chico jugaba. Aba. Nosotros jugábamos. So, habamos. Entonces, ¿por qué es esdrújula? Necesita tilde. Vamos. Vamos. Vosotros jugabais. Abais. Okay. Y jugaban for ellos, right? O, ER, O, IR verbs. So I used to eat fish, right? Okay, so yo comía, right? So, ia. Or tú comías, okay? Él or ella comía, right? Oops, ia. Nosotros comíamos, right? Comíais y comían. So we have a couple of irregular verbs that don't necessarily follow the rules, ser and ir. And so I went, what? Fui. You definitely know these, right? Yo fuiste. So again, fuiste aceptado por todo el mundo hispanohablante. Fuisteis, a veces no, pero sí. Con amigos, familiares, sí. Fue. We'll do a few together, and then the other ones you can work together in groups. So, vamos a escoger entre el imperfecto y el pretérito. So, por ejemplo, los mayas también desarrollar un calendario más preciso que el calendario romano. Okay, so yo escogí desarrollaron. Porque I'm just trying to say they developed a calendar. I'm not trying to say they used to always develop calendars. I'm not trying to say they were in the middle of a developing calendar when an eclipse came. Or I'm not trying to talk about people developing calendars in the background, right? So desarrollaron punto en el tiempo. All right. So el calendario ser redondo y tener dos partes. So this is a little, you could probably choose one of two things, but in my opinion, there's one that's slightly better. So how would you talk about the calendar being round? Era. Era. Now you could say fue, right? But the reason why I would choose era instead of fue is because we're going on to talk about it, right? We're talking about it having two parts, how they're using the calendar. And so I'm trying to describe the scene. I'm trying to describe it in high definition. But if I said fue redondo, it's like, oh, we're going to move on to something else. Okay? All right. And so I would say describe la escena. Okay? Y blank, tener dos partes. So, y tenía, not tuvo, right? Tenía. And so, is it because we're talking about repetición en progreso or describe la escena? What would y'all say? Are we repeating about the calendar? No. Are we talking about the calendar being in progress when something else happened? Are we trying to describe the calendar? Describe la escena. Okay. Ellos usar el calendario para predecir el mejor momento para sembrar semillas. So, ¿usaban o usaron? Which one? Usaron. Levanta la mano, usaban. Levanta la mano, usaron. Oh, half and half. Okay, so remember, this is to paint different pictures. So you absolutely, it could be both. So we have to think about the picture we're painting in this paragraph. Are we talking about the time that they used a calendar to plant? Like one time? Or they used it 4 times? Or they used that calendar for 100 years and stopped? Or are we trying to say they used to use the calendar to decide when to plant? They used to use, right? And so used to use repetición, right? So usaban. Okay. Uno más. El resto ustedes van a hacer. Además, tener un sistema de matemáticas, incluso blank el concepto del uso del número cero, bla, 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 right? So, tenían o tuvieron. Tenían, okay? ¿Por qué tenían y no tuvieron? So, tenían es repetición en progreso o describe la escena. Yeah, and we're talking, because look, we're going on to describe this calendar, right? Or their math, right? We're like tenían un sistema, talking about the sistema. So we're trying to really describe the sistema, right? So describe. And then, this is a little bit harder, but incluso crear el concepto del uso del número cero. ¿Crearon o creaban? Who said creaban? Levanta la mano. Crearon. Okay, crearon. Why? Because at this point, we're talking about them creating the concept of zero, period. They created it, right? And so it's not that they had it, ongoing that they had it. Once they created it, it was done. They created it over. Preterito punto, so punto en el tiempo. Okay, bien? All right. Ustedes pueden hacer el resto, pero en grupos.